Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, senior editor Dan Alexander. Dan, thanks so much for joining me.
Sure, thanks, Brittany.
We have officially passed President Trump's second first 100 days in office. And in this time, he has signed dozens of executive orders, started global trade wars, criticized world leaders both on social media and at one point to their face in the White House, and has made decisions that have really shaken up the markets globally. I'm curious to start off this conversation, if you could, bring us back to 2017. How is this different now in 2025 than when we passed this milestone 8 years ago?
There are several key differences. The first of which is Donald Trump knows what he's doing. This is a guy who's been in the White House before. He knows how to find the people who are going to be supportive of him the most. They also know what they're getting into. Okay, so in the first term, there were a lot of people who, I want to be secretary of this, but they didn't necessarily understand who Donald Trump was. Now everybody knows the bargain going in. So he's got a lot of loyalists around him, and he also can sort of control the narrative. Remember, in the beginning of his first administration, you had the Russia investigation dominating things from the very jump. Now, all of a sudden, Donald Trump is able to dictate the conversation. And what's he talking about? Well, he's talking about making moves on things that he has cared about for decades. So we're talking about tariffs, the way that international countries contribute to alliances, immigration. These are really core values for Donald Trump, who doesn't have strong opinions on everything in politics, but certainly does on a few things, and that's what he's focusing on.
So let's talk about one of those things, and that thing is tariffs. He promised tariffs on the campaign trail. As you said, he's been pro-tariffs since at least the 80s, and he's been saying that the United States has been getting ripped off for decades. And you're reporting that he's been, as you said, implementing ideas that he's held on to for decades. So talk to us about that a little bit more. Is anything you've seen so far in these first 100 days surprising?
Not that surprising given who he is and given what he cares about. Remember, Donald Trump is somebody who feels ripped off, and he feels like the country's been ripped off. But he was that way in business. He's somebody who negotiated every last contractor, and when they got into discussions after a job was done, oftentimes would threaten litigation or say, we're not going to pay you. This is somebody who is used to being in the position of saying, you know what, even though everything's going okay and I'm doing well, somehow I'm getting ripped off. And that's the same approach that he's taking now with the country. Now, one thing that's different here from the first time is that the first time it wasn't entirely clear how much power Trump had to personally impose tariffs. So tariffs are something that historically Congress has had a huge role in. Now, all of a sudden, because of some litigation that happened in the first term, it's clear that the president does have very broad authority on tariffs, and he's using that authority and applying tariffs to virtually everybody in the world.
At a rally, as you said, that President Trump is trying to control the narrative. He said this was the best 100 days in history for any president, essentially. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said this, quote, "In his first 100 days, President Trump has delivered on hundreds of promises and already accomplished his two most important campaign goals. The border is secure and inflation is ending." And of course, as we know, any press secretary is really going to spin any action for the president as great, the best, historic. And his hardline immigration policies have been pillars of his second term, and his administration's deportation practices in particular have been controversial. He hasn't brought inflation down to zero, and economists have warned that his tariff policies will hike up prices. So far, what do you think are some of those defining moments of this second term? And is he achieving the goals he's setting out to achieve? Is he leaving that legacy he wants to impart? I mean, what does that really look like?
Well, let's first take Caroline Leavitt's statement head on. So first of all, securing the border. They really have done a cool job of changing things in swift order at the border. Enforcement interactions are down by roughly 94% since Biden was in office, and that's just in a couple of months. So that is dramatic, swift change. That certainly is what Donald Trump wanted and what many of his voters wanted. On inflation, the other thing that she says that they've already accomplished, as you point out, that's not really true. I mean, the most recent read on inflation was at 2.4%. That's exactly where it was in September of 2024 when Joe Biden was in office. When Trump took office, 2%. So it's down a little bit from there. But again, this isn't a meaningful change. And certainly the measurement that came in at the end of March at 2.4%, there's reason to believe that it's going to go higher because the tariff announcements happened right at the start of April. So we still haven't seen a measurement that takes those into account. To sort of declare victory on inflation at this point is premature. Now, what are the other defining moments? Look, obviously the meeting with Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office is a big, big moment. That was a warning shot not just to Ukraine and to Zelensky, but also to the entire world, saying, look, the United States is not going to pay indiscriminate to defend our allies anymore. That's a big, big deal. And you can see a reaction to that immediately in Europe. Countries are trying to figure out, okay, how do we load up on arms to support Ukraine? And if push comes to shove, maybe to even defend ourselves. The United States is not going to be that backstop that it's always. Again, this is a talking point that Donald Trump has been mentioning since the 1980s. Okay, at that point, he was complaining that Kuwait was the beneficiary of American largesse. Now it's Ukraine. Okay, he doesn't like it when U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to support the defense of countries that he doesn't care much about. He does not care much about Ukraine, just as he did not care much about Kuwait. And so that's really a consistent point that he's made through the decades, and now he's in a position where he can flip things around and change them. Obviously, the tariffs have been a massive, massive story in the beginning of his administration, upending markets, moving trillions of dollars by day. And Donald Trump, he's the sort of guy who he has just stirred all this up, and now he gets to be in the middle of the mix, and he loves it. Okay, this is somebody. I talked to one of his business partners, and I said, "How when Trump was in office or when he was in business, how did he measure himself? Was he like a revenue guy or a profit guy?" And he was basically said, "No, he was kind of more of a headline guy." Okay, if something is successful, if something gets a lot of attention, that's what gets Donald Trump excited. So the fact that he stirred up all of this, he loves being in the center of the storm.
Is he having a good time right now? I mean, let's just talk about that because, as you said, he has the power right now. His words, his posts on social media have the power to move trillions globally. I mean, is he reveling in that power right now?
Donald Trump loves to be in the mix, and he is in the mix right now, and he has stirred up the mix. Okay, so he can Twitter truth or whatever, millions of dollars. He's somebody who used to obsess about small headlines. Now he's creating massive ones, and any word that he says, everybody's all over it. He loves attention. He loves being at the center of the storm. Right now he is. There's no reason that Donald Trump is happy in his current position.
And you mentioned that meeting between Zelensky as well as President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the White House. That was a warning shot to the rest of the world. I mean, that was the White House meeting heard around the world. Something else, obviously, the tariffs. President Trump is really enjoying saying, hey, I like people, world leaders coming to me, making a deal with me. They need to pick up the phone and call me. What is the rest of the world thinking in this Trump 2.0? I mean, because this isn't Trump's first rodeo here, and it's not the rest of the world's first rodeo dealing with a President Trump.
Yeah, and I think that the perspective depends on the country, right? So if you're in Canada right now, it's very different than if you're in China right now, which is very different than if you're in Russia right now, which is very different than if you're in France right now. I mean, so all of these different countries are going to come at this with a different perspective, but they all know more of who they're dealing with now. Okay, so they know how to ingratiate Trump, how to compliment him, make him feel good. They also know that he's not somebody who's going to take a win and sort of be satisfied with it. So they might be more likely to approach him aggressively. It just depends on what their perspective is, what they're trying to accomplish. But you can expect that just like Trump's own cabinet understands him better, now the world understands him better, and people will use that to their advantage if they can.
He's been surrounding himself by loyalists. He's been surrounding himself by members of a cabinet that are more yes men than in the first term. And it's really impossible to talk about Trump 2.0 without talking about Elon Musk and the influence that the world's richest man really has on this administration. He is the face of Doge. He's also President Trump's advisor. Can you talk to us a little bit about that relationship?
Well, it's obviously a key relationship, particularly here at the start of the term. You know, Musk comes in with a incredible amount of power, able to reach into and touch industry or agencies all across the government, shut down USAID effectively, make significant cuts to the Department of Education, and also just sort of take up a lot of oxygen. Have that be the focus. We're about efficiency. We're about cutting the budget. Whether or not he's able to actually cut as much as he has promised he would be able to, it still sends a clear message to the American public that this is a priority. And Donald Trump loves being around rich people, always has. And there's nobody richer in the world than Elon Musk right now. And so he loves that. He loves the idea of I'm bringing rich people who he thinks that rich means smart. And so he loves bringing rich people, therefore smart people, into the White House and saying, these are the kinds of people that I can bring in. Doesn't that mean that I'm an amazing leader?
President Trump touted at a rally that was marking his 100 days that he is the best president, or this was the best 100 days in the history of any president. It's not clear that the American people think that way. An ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll shows President Trump right now with the lowest approval rating than any other president at this time in their presidency in the past 8 decades. So that means people liked the first version of Trump better than this Trump in his presidency right now. Based on your reporting, based on what you know about Trump, does that change the way he approaches the next 3.5 years? I mean, what does that mean for him?
Donald Trump's a pretty stubborn guy. He's also somebody who is used to catching a lot of flack, and is used to having people, laugh at him, ridicule his ideas, that sort of thing. He has been fixated on the same things for decades, and I expect that he will remain so, even with a lot of criticism. One of the things that's different this time is that the biggest story is not the Russia investigation, which, yes, he was an integral part of, but it wasn't a decision of his to make that investigation the center story in the news. Now the center story in the news is tariffs, and that was his call. And those tariffs have upended global markets, and it's hard for him to step away from that, to disclaim ownership of that. And with the stock market not performing particularly well since he took office, with tariffs throwing every market into chaos and having it very difficult for people to plan their businesses, you're seeing a lot of people who were supportive of Trump in the first term say, wait a second, this isn't exactly what we signed up for.
And in a world right now, like you said, plagued with this uncertainty caused by the tariffs that President Trump himself revealed, I mean, what specifically are you looking out for next?
Well, I think that the big question is whether Trump is able to bring stability to the chaos that he has stirred up. So there are a lot of trade deals that need to happen in order to bring the markets to a calmer place. And you see that the market is reacting generally to sort of whispers about deals with China, but there are a lot of countries that he has just slapped tariffs on that he needs to come to an agreement with. If he is able to do that, that will set a much different narrative. But for a guy who has been, forged his career on sort of stirring things up and going after opponents, I think it might be difficult for him to make the switch to being the solution guy, to being the guy who is going to settle all of this out. My expectation is that there will be some version of a trade war for several years, even if it's not as all-encompassing as it is right now, because there's just a lot of deals that need to be struck.
Well, we have well over 1,000 days left of President Trump in the White House, and I'm sure as news comes out of each of those, you will be back on and breaking it down with me. Dan Alexander, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Brittany.